The night the music stopped, Dean Martin versus the mob. The champagne bottle didn't just pop. It sounded like a gunshot. In any other city, a noise like that would make people duck for cover. But this was Las Vegas. This was the Copa Room at the Sands Hotel. And on the night of August 12th, 1962, that sound wasn't a celebration. It was a declaration of war. Sammy Davis Jr. was mid-note singing his heart out when the liquid hit him. Expensive French champagne, soaking his tuxedo, dripping down his face, stinging his eyes. The band faltered. The music died. 2,000 people in the audience went absolutely silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. You could hear the air conditioning humming, because everyone in that room knew exactly who had popped that bottle. Everyone knew who was sitting at the front table, surrounded by 5 men who looked like they strangled people for a living. His name was Victor Duca. Vic the Blade. A capo from the Chicago outfit. A man who didn't just have people killed. He made them disappear. He owned half the unions in Nevada, and the other half were terrified of him. He was a man who had never been told no in his entire adult life. And tonight, he decided he wanted to humiliate Sammy Davis Jr., not because Sammy had done anything wrong, but because Sammy was black, successful, and standing on a stage that Vic Duca felt belonged to him. "Dance, boy," Vic shouted. His voice was thick with alcohol and malice. "Wipe that stuff off your face and dance for us." His table laughed. It was a cruel, jagged sound. Sammy stood there, frozen. He was one of the greatest entertainers in the world. He could sing, dance, act, and make you cry within 5 minutes. But in 1962, none of that mattered to men like Vic Duca. To them, Sammy wasn't a star. He was property. He was entertainment. He was something to be used and discarded. Sammy wiped the champagne from his eyes. His hand was trembling. Just a little. He looked at the band, ready to signal, them to keep playing, ready to swallow his pride, ready to do what he had done 1,000 times before. Smile through the pain. Pretend it didn't hurt. Keep the show going, because that's what professionals do. That's how you survive. But he never got the chance, because from the shadows of the stage wings, a lighter clicked, a flame flared up, a cigarette was lit, and then Dean Martin walked out. He wasn't supposed to be on stage yet. It was Sammy's solo set. But Dean walked out anyway. He didn't have a microphone. He didn't have a drink in his hand. He didn't have his famous sleepy-eyed smile. He walked to the center of the stage, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at Sammy. He saw the wet jacket. He saw the humiliation in his friend's eyes. He saw the pain that Sammy was trying so desperately to hide. Then Dean turned to the audience. He didn't yell. He didn't wave his arms. He just walked to the edge of the stage, right in front of Vic Duca's table, and looked down. Dean Martin was known as the King of Cool, the man who didn't care about anything, the man who treated life like one big party. But the people who really knew him, the people who saw behind the curtain, knew the truth. Dean was from Steubenville, Ohio. He had worked in steel mills. He had dealt blackjack in illegal backrooms. He had boxed bare knuckle for cash. Dean Martin wasn't just cool, he was dangerous. And right now, he was lethal. "Did you do that?" Dean asked. His voice was conversational, quiet, almost polite. Vic Duca leaned back in his chair. He had a cigar in his mouth. He looked at Dean with a smirk that said he owned the hotel, the stage, and everyone on it. "Yeah, I did." Vic said, "I was thirsty, and your boy here looked like he needed a drink." The men at the table chuckled again, but the rest of the room was deadly quiet. People were holding their breath. They knew who Vic was. They knew that people who disrespected him usually ended up in a hole in the desert. Dean didn't blink. He didn't look at the bodyguards who were shifting in their seats, their hands moving inside their jackets. He kept his eyes locked on Vic. "Apologize," Dean said. Vic froze. The cigar stopped halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me," Vic asked. "You heard me. You threw a drink on my friend. You disrupted my show. You disrespected this room. Apologize to him. Now." Vic Duca laughed. It was a loud, barking sound, but his eyes weren't laughing. His eyes were cold. "You must be confused, Dino. You think because you're a movie star, you can talk to me like that? You think your name on the marquee protects you. I put you there. Men like me built this town. You just work here. Now get back to your microphone and sing before I decide to cancel your contract permanently." It was a threat, a death threat, clear as day. Sammy stepped forward. He put a hand on Dean's arm. "Dean, let it go. It's okay. I'm okay. Please." Sammy knew the danger. He knew that Vic Duca wasn't bluffing. He didn't want Dean to get hurt. He didn't want to be the reason his best friend got killed, but Dean didn't move. He didn't look at Sammy. He gently took Sammy's hand off his arm without breaking eye contact with the mob boss. "No, Sam, it's not okay." Dean looked back at Vic. "I'm not going to sing, Victor, and neither is Sammy. In fact, nobody is singing. The show is over." He turned to the band leader. "Pack it up. We're done." The band leader looked terrified. He looked from Dean to Vic, unsure of who to obey. "I said pack it up," Dean commanded. His voice cracked like a whip. Then he turned back to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am truly sorry, but I cannot perform in a room where my brother is treated like an animal. You can go to the box office for a full refund. Drinks are on me. Good night." A gasp went through the room. 2,000 people. Millions of dollars in gambling revenue tied to this show. The prestige of the Sands Hotel. Dean was throwing it all away. Vic Duca stood up. His face was red. His veins were bulging. He wasn't used to being defied. He wasn't used to losing. "Sit down, Martin." Vic growled. "You walk off that stage and you'll never work in Vegas again. I'll make sure of it. I'll break your legs. I'll ruin you." Dean smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose. And this is where you need to understand something about Dean Martin, something that Vic Duca didn't know. Dean didn't care about fame. He didn't care about money. He didn't care about legacy. Years later, when his son, Dean Paul Martin, would die in a plane crash, the world would see a broken man who welcomed death. But that darkness had always been there. Dean walked through life with a fatalistic indifference. He wasn't afraid of dying because deep down he never took life that seriously to begin with. But he took loyalty seriously. He took brotherhood seriously. Dean stepped down from the stage. He didn't stay on the raised platform. He walked down the stairs onto the floor right into Vic Duca's personal space. He was now standing inches from the most dangerous man in Nevada. The bodyguards stood up, 4 walls of muscle and bad intentions. Dean ignored them. He stood toe-to-toe with Vic. "You can break my legs, Victor," Dean said softly. "You can ban me from Vegas. You can shoot me right here in front of all these nice people. I know you can. I know who you are." Dean leaned in closer. "But here is what you are going to do first. You are going to look at Sammy, and you are going to apologize, because if you don't, I am going to walk out those doors, and I am going to tell every reporter, every cop, and every fan in America that Victor Duca is a small, insecure bully who gets his kicks attacking people who can't fight back. I will make you a joke. I will make you a punchline. And you know what your bosses in Chicago do to people who become jokes? They retire them." The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Vic Duca stared at Dean. He was looking for fear. He was looking for the blink. He was looking for the moment where the actor realized he was playing with fire and backed down. But Dean didn't back down. He stood there, relaxed, hands at his sides, breathing easy, like he was waiting for a bus. It was a game of chicken, a mob boss versus a singer, a loaded gun versus a loaded reputation. Seconds ticked by. 5, 10, 20. Vic Duca looked at his men. They were waiting for a signal, a nod, anything. But Vic was smart. He was vicious, but he was smart. He realized something in that moment. Dean Martin wasn't bluffing. Dean Martin was crazy enough to burn the entire casino down just to prove a point. And if Vic killed him right here with 2,000 witnesses, the heat from the FBI would burn the Chicago outfit to the ground. Dean had trapped him, not with muscle, but with pure, unadulterated nerve. Vic's jaw tightened. He ground his teeth so hard you could hear it. "Fine." Vic spat. He turned to Sammy, who was still standing on stage, watching in disbelief. "Sorry," Vic mumbled. Dean shook his head. "I couldn't hear you, Victor, and I don't think Sammy heard you." Vic's face turned a shade of purple that looked painful. He took a deep breath. He shouted, "I'm sorry, all right? It was a joke. I'm sorry." Dean nodded. He patted Vic on the shoulder, a gesture so patronizing, so dominant, that the bodyguards flinched. "See? That wasn't so hard. Now get out." "What?" Vic asked. "Get out," Dean repeated. "Take your boys. Take your champagne. And get out of my showroom. You're not welcome here tonight." Vic looked like he was going to explode, but the spell was broken. The power had shifted. The audience, realizing that Dean had won, started to murmur. Then someone clapped. Then someone else. Vic Duca grabbed his jacket. He glared at Dean one last time. "This isn't over," he whispered. "It's over when I say it's over," Dean replied. Vic turned and marched. Out. His men followed like scolded dogs. As the doors swung shut behind them, the room erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. People were standing on chairs. People were crying. Dean didn't bow. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. He just walked back up the stairs, took a handkerchief from his pocket, and started drying Sammy's face. "You okay, kid?" Dean asked. Sammy looked at him. Tears were mixing with the champagne. "You're crazy, Dean. You know that. You're absolutely crazy. He could have killed you." Dean shrugged. He lit a cigarette. "He could have, but he didn't. Besides, nobody messes with my family." And that was the word. Family. See, people think the Rat Pack was just a marketing gimmick. A group of guys who drank and sang together for money. But nights like that proved them wrong. They were brothers. Not by blood, but by choice. And in Dean Martin's world, that bond was stronger than steel. Stronger than fear. Stronger than the Mafia. Frank Sinatra was the leader. He was. The loud one. The fighter. But Dean was the anchor. Frank would scream at a mob boss. Dean would just look at him until the mob boss looked away. Years later, when the lights of Vegas dimmed and the glory days were over, Sammy Davis Jr. lay dying in his home. Throat cancer had stolen his voice. He couldn't sing. He could barely speak. Dean sat by his bedside for hours. They didn't talk much. They watched old westerns on TV. One night, Sammy grabbed Dean's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Why?" Sammy whispered. "That night, with Vic. Why did you do it?" Dean looked at his friend. He saw the same man he had stood beside on that stage 30 years ago. "Because you're my brother, Sam," Dean said, "and because it was the right thing to do." It sounds like a movie script. It sounds too heroic to be true. But ask anyone who was at the Sands that night. Ask the musicians. Ask the waiters. They will tell you. They will tell you about the silence. They will tell you about the fear. And they will tell you about the man who walked into the lion's den without a weapon, armed only with his dignity and his love for a friend. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. He died alone in his home, watching television. The world mourned the singer. They mourned the actor. They mourned the drunk, funny, charming guy from the variety shows. But they didn't know the real Dean. The real Dean was the man who stood in front of a killer and said no. The real Dean was the man who buried his son and never recovered because his heart was too big to handle the grief. The real Dean was the man who taught us that being cool isn't about the cigarette or the drink or the tuxedo. Being cool is about standing your ground when everyone else is running away. There is an old saying in Vegas, the house always wins. But on that night in 1962, the house didn't win. The mob didn't win. Fear didn't win. Dean Martin won, and he did it without throwing a single punch. So the next time you hear Everybody Loves Somebody playing on the radio, don't just listen to the voice. Listen to the character behind the voice. Listen to the strength hidden in the velvet, because legends aren't born. They are made in the moments when the music stops, the laughter dies, and you have to decide who you really are. Dean Martin knew who he was, and thanks to him, so did Sammy Davis Jr. That is the story they don't tell you in the documentaries. That is the story that explains why, 50 years later, we still look at Dean Martin and wish we had just an ounce of that class. Because class isn't about how you act when the world is watching. It's about how you act when the gun is on the table and your brother needs you. Dean Martin, the king of cool. The brother, the hero. The man who stopped the music to save a soul.